It's basically opening through window media. Okay, we're going to start in 1 minute.
Okay, so we are live. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us at AISS, the Annual Information Security Summit. It is so great to have you. And, so Forcepoint team, Brandon and Brijesh and I were discussing that, it's so early morning and we are discussing such an important topic in such an interesting fashion. So thank you so much for joining us. So in next 3 days, during the AISS, we have power-packed 70+ sessions and workshops for you. And, we are starting with Forcepoint right now. Now, before I get into today's topic, introduce the panelists, let me also give you the overview of our AISS Summit and how it is planned. So our program is spread across parallel tracks, plenaries, sub-summits, and awards, right? And about 230+ speakers have registered, and all the speakers are from different sectors, companies, and they hold different roles and responsibilities, which means that the interaction that we are going to see in next 3 days, it will be phenomenal, I'm sure. And I'm not speaking this because I am from DSCI and Agenda team, but I'm speaking this because, this is the feedback that we have received from people over the years, and this is the 15th edition of AISS. Right? And I've also been updated that we are close to 3,200 registrations till yesterday evening. So I'm super excited for this. So let's just kickstart AISS with Forcepoint presentation workshop. And the topic of today, as you can see on your screen, is Institutionalizing an Adaptive Trust Approach to Modern Cyber Risk. And this is the parallel workshop at AISS, and DSCI and Forcepoint are really excited for this. Now, before we get into the topic, let me just summarize at least my experience of 2020 of moderating, of presenting different webinars over the year. Key terms that I've heard in cybersecurity context. Number one, the insider threat. Number two, the digitization and the contours of digitization, for example, right? The data, ZTNA, trust, cyber risk. And there's so many different terms that I've heard from CXOs, from the leaders during my tenure in 2020, right? And today's workshop is really special because we bring all these terms together, and we will see through the use cases, through the problem discussions with the clients, we will see all those experiences come together that will shape up today's workshop. Now, another reason, what we've seen in 2020 is that privacy, for example, this has become domain in itself. Now, the journey had started a few years back, but until I would say 2016, 2017, privacy just involved societal choices, right? So it was only about the moral values, whether should I do this or not, right? But what has happened in the last 2-3 years that it has become a domain in itself. Another change that we see, cybersecurity. Cybersecurity has always been, till recently, it has been a technical issue, right? Wherever you speak to board member or CXOs, they would say, oh, this is the IT problem, don't bother me with all those jargons, right? But now, because of the rapid digitization, cybersecurity has become a CXO topic, a boardroom topic, and they are speaking in business terms, and business and IT are collaborating. Now, another change that we see over the years is trust. Now, it is not just about data, right? It is not just about storing the customer data or using the customer data. It is about the trust. It is about trust between your customers, the clients, and also it is about how you process or consume the data that you collect. The second, within this important factor is, of course, the architecture level changes. And thanks to distributed work environment, companies are now undergoing the massive transformation. Then there is borderless security, which will stay with us. Now, insider threat was definitely a concern area for many organizations for many, many years. But because of this borderless security, because of this distributed work environment, insider threat has got to a whole new level. And there are ways to minimize it, and we will learn one such way in today's workshop as well. Now, while we discuss all these terms in detail, we will also see how do we leverage data that we collect to understand the user behavior. We will see how do we leverage data for better user protection, right? So these are important things that we will answer in today's presentation, right? Now, before I introduce my speakers, there's a logistic information that I wanted to give you. We have 2 poll questions in the workshop, and I would request everyone to open another tab or another browser and log into kahoot.it. So we will run this poll using kahoot.it, and all we need is the user pin that we will provide you when we ask this question, and second is you will have to enter your name or a nickname, and that's about it. But I request you to please enter a unique name so that we can identify the results as well. So like I said, this workshop is designed with series of use cases, and we'll do a deep dive into a case study. And for doing that, we have Mr. Brandon Tan, who is the APAC Director, Sales Engineering Forcepoint. A brief about Brandon is that he is leading the highly skilled consultants in his office, and he has been in large deployment. He has taken various initiatives, various client initiatives, so to say, and has been part of the deployments across the region, across the globe. And he has also been part of the investigations of high-profile breaches and data theft for his clients. We also have Mr. Brijesh Miglani, who is the team lead sales engineering, and he has over 15 years of experience, enterprise security experience that span across different domains. Banking, manufacturing, telecommunications are some of the sectors that come to my mind, while I was speaking to Brijesh. Now, Brijesh is also a trusted security advisor to some of the top enterprises for data security, insider threat program, and cyber threat intelligence. And along with Brandon and Brijesh, we will also be accompanied by Mr. Amit Dhawan, who is the CISO and Data Protection Officer at BirlaSoft. And I and Akshat are your host for today from DSEI. So Akshat is associate at DSEI, who will be helping us with the poll and supporting me, and I'm Deputy Director at DSEI. So with this, let me hand it over to Brandon to take this workshop ahead. Brandon.
Thank you, Sumit. First and foremost, we are really excited to be here. When we first got the invite from DSEI, it was like, we felt it's a real privilege, to be invited, and we are really excited to be doing this workshop together with you and with the rest of the audience over here. So like I said, I'm joined by my colleague, Brijesh, right? And we've been working together for a while now, and we share a lot of common values, right? We basically, look into the threat landscape, in the market. And as much as, everyone will think their situation is unique, right? As you look across, India into APAC, into, the global lens, you start realizing, it's not too different. The challenges that is being faced, by business, by security practitioner. And we've decided to do a workshop to basically talk about, what are the common challenges that are faced by organizations around the world. All right? Some of these are things that we have experienced it ourselves with some of our largest, enterprise customers in the world, and some of these, are challenges that is brought to us. All right, and they just came to us and they share their pain point, they share their problems. All right, and we felt there are, some good learning points, right, that we want to cover in the workshop itself, and it's going to be a unique way of delivery because it's not going to be me presenting the slides. So we're going to bring up a couple of topics, and I invite you, Sumit, to join our discussion as well. And I've done this many times with Brijesh. Sometimes, we get into very passionate type of arguments, right? It's for the good, right? It's for the good, right? And we are hoping that we're going to do it again, in front of, the rest of the audience over here. Now, just to set the stage and the agenda, the first part of it, basically speaks about what you have just summarized a while ago. So you talk about, digital transformation, you talk about, people working from home, you talk about borderless, and we just want to, hit a point, the fact that, these cyber risk challenges that we have been facing in the past has actually evolved. All right, things that we used to believe, things that we used to learn, things that used to work, right, may break. As of now, it's already breaking. I'm not even talking about breaking in the future. If you look into some of things like working from home, and with 5G going to be rolled out really soon, all right, things is going to just change so quickly that a lot of security practitioners will be struggling to basically catch up, with that evolution. So with that, people speak about zero trust a lot. All right, they talk about zero trust architecture. They talk about zero trust framework, and it depends who you speak to. Everyone somehow will have their views of zero trust. All right, and talking to a security practitioner, you get a more objective view. Speaking to vendors, it depends on what I'm selling today. I will have a very different answers for you if you ask me what is zero trust. All right, so we want to stay, as objective as possible. We want to talk about zero trust in general. All right, and what's going to be really interesting in this workshop itself, we're going to talk about practical use cases. All right, I'm sure there are tons of white papers that you can download and you can read it through. And when we talk about use cases, we talk about examples of how zero trust can help, right, in addressing some of these risk challenges. All right, and when we use the word risk challenges, in the context and in respect, of the forum itself, we are probably, confining most of the discussion on the point of data protection. All right, and of course, it applies, on a wider scale. All right, and in the doctrine of zero trust, every resources, all right, is to be protected. All right, and in this case, it can be a data, all right, in our conversation, it can be your users, it can be any services or resources within your organization. All right, and it applies the exact same way. Now, on the third and the fourth part, on the third part of the workshop, it's where it gets really interesting. All right, so Brijesh, as myself and Brijesh was going through the workshop agenda, he was telling me, he said, let's not talk about pure philosophical view of zero trust. All right, in this workshop, he says he wants to bring it up one note higher. All right, so and then he was challenging me and said, why don't we talk about real use cases and then do a demonstration of how this could have been prevented or how this could have been addressed, all right, with certain technology that is available today. All right, and I say that's a great idea. All right, and before we go into the highlight of the workshop itself, we just want to make sure we cover some ground. We want to build out the understanding. We're going to talk about the architecture and the framework of the approach itself. All right, and then we're going to demonstrate to the rest of them how this thing works. We are also very fortunate to be joined by Amit, a CISO, right, that Brijesh has invited personally. And it's interesting because we want to start off the workshop by talking about our views of this issue and our views of a potential solution to some of these modern issues. And then we want to hear it from a CISO, all right, on your neutral point of view. How does he resonate to this? All right, does he agree to this? Does he see it as a common challenges in his organization as well? And we want to talk about trends as well. All right, we want to speak about where do we see this going forward. All right, so a lot of time that anticipation is extremely important because so long we are talking about what is available today, we will always be catching up. All right, we will always be catching up with perpetrators. All right, people are really thinking about new ways of getting data, new ways of attacking. So the only way is to basically think one step ahead. All right, and to have practitioner and a very seasoned CISO like Amit, all right, it's going to share a lot of important knowledge, right, where all of us can learn a thing or two. All right, Brijesh, is there anything you want to add on it before we start off the polling question?
Yeah, so I think first of all, thanks to the DSCI team, and it's really privileged to be part of this workshop. And as Brendan mentioned, the agenda that we are covering today. So the focus is just to make sure that it should be more interactive. Sunit will definitely helping us in putting your questions back to us during that discussion. And we want to focus it more on a practical use cases, as Brendan mentioned. Okay, so that we will not confuse you with the terms that we are hearing from the last 8-9 months, like zero trust, like digital transformations, user protection, and all. So we want to bring a more on-ground view how it looks like in a real practical scenario. So with that, I think let's start with the first polling question. And Sunit, can we go with that?
Yes. So Akshat, so I've made you the presenter. Can you please screen the first poll question for the audience?
Thank you, Sunit. Can you see my screen?
Yes. Now it just disappeared. You have to reshare again, please.
Thank you, Sunit. I hope you can see my screen now.
It's coming up. Yes, but I can't see the question. So can you read out the question for us, please?
Yes, for that, we would, may I request the audience to please log on to kahoot.it for taking the poll.
Please
The
log on to
website
kahoot.it.
www.kahoot.it, and once you log on, it will ask you for a game pin. So for the game pin, you need to enter this number, 5719539. So Gaurav has entered the poll. We have one more participant, BT. Lolo, Shrina, thanks for joining. Great. Sunit, we have around 13 participants. Please let me know when we can start.
Yeah, let's just give a few seconds more.
Sure. So we have 20 now.
Yeah, I think we can display the question.
Great, let's start. So here is your first question.
So I'll just read out. Changing trends due to remote workforce has brought modern risk back to the organization. Which one of the following is the biggest?
For selecting option, you need to select the corresponding figure in your mobile devices. So here is the result.
Okay, so according to the audience, the ransomware is the biggest risk, and followed by zero trust remote access, and then the other two are way behind. So Brandon, I think you would agree with the result of ransomware at least, right? Brajesh, Brandon, I think this is what I've been hearing, but yeah, you will have more stories to tell from the client.
Absolutely, Sunit. And it's interesting because when we ask these questions in different forums, we kind of get mixed answers. All right, but in this forum, it's like it's like majority agree. It's ransomware being the biggest threat. All right, when we try these poll questions in other type of forums, we see very balanced answers. All right, and obviously there's no right or wrong answer. A threat is a threat. All right, it's difficult to tell people that ransomware threat is higher than this and that is lower than that, but it's kind of consistent with a lot of reports. So ransomware is obviously one of the biggest issues that a lot of them are very concerned of. But if you look into ransomware itself, there are a few areas of how you can dissect that issue and address it, because essentially it's a type of denial of services. All right, if you think about it, it denies you from being able to access your own data. It denies you from being able to access your own computing resources, right, to begin with. Now, in ransomware itself, the approach to ransomware has multiple perspectives, right? And people look into addressing it from different ways. There are those, who speaks about zero-day attack, APT sandboxing, and the list goes on, right? And the list goes on. Now, what we are particularly interested in is the fact that if you think about, the ransomware attack itself, there are multiple phases to that part, all right? So there is a part that they don't just hit you on ransomware. Many a time, they click onto a phishing email, all right? And they have a drive-by attack, all right? And then a drive-by attack results in something else, and eventually, the ransomware happens. Now, what is interesting these days is we are looking into those days where we look into, WannaCry and all, and they just held you ransom and they ask you to pay money, and then, they unlock you. Now, we have also encountered cases, and these are real examples without naming names, and organization. In many cases, the ransomware, when they start holding you ransom, it's basically the last part of the attack, all right? So think of it as a chain of events, all right? And prior to the last part of the attack, if they can install an encryption tool into your machine, right, for the sake of easier understanding, they have absolutely all access to extract the data from the machine, all right? And by paying ransom, yes, you get back access to your computing resource and you get back access to your data. It does not mean your data has not been stolen, all right? And we just want to pause there for a while and think about that consequences, all right? Many people, I have customers who have actually paid and they have their services restored and they were partially happy, all right? And then after a while, they start thinking about the consequences. It's like, hey, if they can have this ransom and they can install things into my machine, what about, data in my machine that got extracted out, all right? So what do we do with that, all right? And if we pause there for a moment, that is definitely, a very pressing issue as well. Now, and that is a good polling question because that leads us straight into the modern cyber risk, on the user side and the data. So, Brijesh, if you can just run the full slides, all right? Now, we speak about threat actors, and this is not new, all right? You have always had external attacker, you have always have accidental loss, and you have always had malicious insider. And this is not a new threat actor, all right, per se. And this tree itself does not qualify for modern cyber risk, all right? This has been longest, threat actors. Now, what is very interesting over here is that because of the change of technology and the change of how we consume technology, right? Things like how we used to send email in the past has changed, right? The way we send email today. If we look into email in the past, we used to use Exchange server in most cases, all right? I have Outlook, I connected to Exchange. Exchange is in my data center, all right? It's in, in a secure room, all right? And only thing that is allowed out, it's basically SMTP, it's basically email, all right? That's it. But today, email itself is very interesting because you no longer host the email service itself. Let's take O365, for example, it's hosted on the cloud, all right? And when it is hosted on the cloud, the most interesting news that I got very early this morning, all right, was actually a news on the US government that got it's an alleged report, right? They got compromised because of their email communication, all right? And that was a report on email communication on O365 where they were being, attacked by what they claim a nation state sponsored, and it was a cyber espionage, all right? So in the case of cyber espionage, they were monitoring their emails for months, all right? And that's interesting, all right? So if you think about that threat, it's amazing how can it be in there for months being monitored and no one, found anything fishy, all right? So that's one part. And email communication is things that we take it for granted, right? We don't think email as something that you want to protect immediately, right? Let's be honest. If I ask Brijesh, what do you want to protect first? He was going to tell me, let's go to our database, right? If people think about databases first, people think about email servers last, It doesn't seem to be the place where you have all the confidential information. But think about it, your pay slips are there, your customers' information, their invoices are there, financial transactions are there. There are so many transactions that are still on email. And having access to that email itself is just tremendous, right? Way of mining information. And it's actually the easier way of doing it instead of breaking into database servers with layers of defenses, with encryption and whatnot, right? Now, the next part of this is obviously collaboration. We look into different types of collaboration tools. We were putting up these slides and we were sharing it with you, Sunit, and I was realizing that Bridges was using different tools to basically share that file itself, right? And it's amazing because I look at him and say, hey, I thought we have a internal collaboration tool. And they say, yeah, but Sunit doesn't use our internal collaboration tool. And you have a point, right? As much as organizations try to standardize collaboration tool, you can't change the fact that you have external collaborator, right? And what happened at that point of time? One party has to compromise. Either I make Sunit use my collaboration tool, or I will have to use Sunit's collaboration tool, right? This platform itself is the perfect example. We don't use Meridian in Forcepoint, all right? But because of this platform, we will use Meridian, all right? And then if I invite Sunit into my next session, it's going to end up using our Zoom, right? For example, all right? And that's collaboration tool. So it's difficult to unify it. Like it or not, you will have to create access for external people to come in and to allow them access to certain things. The adoption of SAS, it's obvious, right? And the more interesting part is actually the 5G network. So if we think about people working from home and users that got compromised, the biggest topic about data loss and data theft, we have this term, we call it data exfiltration. So the idea of data exfiltration here is, I have access to your machine, for example, Sunit, and I try to extract data out, right? But it's a big laptop that you have there, right? You probably have 80 gigs, 128 gigs of hard disk, probably 50 gigs of data is something that I want. But if you're using 4G, if you're using your house broadband, the speed that I'm able to extract data from you is somewhat limited to the speed of the bandwidth. And then with 5G network basically being 10 times faster than 4G, and they were saying that you could download, the entire movie in just 3 seconds, all right? And assuming the movie it depends, all right? I'm assuming they're not talking about 4K. Let's just take a couple of gigs of movies, all right? In 3 seconds is huge, all right? That means if I want to pull out 40 gigs data from your laptop, it can potentially just take me 30 seconds, all right? So that small time frame of window is sufficient for me to pull off all the information. So gone are the days where people talk about you have to stay, in the network and extract data low and slow. Right? Gone are the days because you don't have to do it low and slow. I'm going to go out with a bang. I'm going to tell you, pom, I'm going to take 10 gig of data out in a couple of 10 seconds. And to be quite honest, by that time, when you have 5G, it will no longer be an anomaly because people look into traffic anomaly. Right? It's like my usual bandwidth is 500 meg. If I see a spike, something is wrong. But by the time that you see my normal traffic is 10 gig and then there is also 11 gig, it's like, what's the difference, right? That anomaly is not going to be very, very obvious. All right, so what we're trying to say here is the threat actor remains the same. The compromised users in the bottom remains vulnerable. But it's the change of the environment that basically kind of, multiply exponentially the risk of this user getting his data harvested. All right, and it's going to be so much easier. So if you look at it, it's like all stars are aligned for the attacker to basically come in and grab data. All right, it's just that we are making it easier with all this adoption of new technology. All right.
So Brendan, you touch upon multiple channels, right, which we have started using, or I think every organization started using more efficiently from the last 8-9 months. You talked about the SaaS as a platform, okay, and you mentioned that once we adopted a SaaS, we are very much okay, right? We are saying all is well, right? Everything is going good, or a SaaS. Now, when the people adopt a SaaS, there is always a concept of a shared responsibility model, okay, when it's come to security over a SaaS. Okay, so I definitely want your view on that. And then the data which is moving there, whether it's a collaboration platform, whether it's an email, whether it's a 5G network says, and they are sharing your location coordinates and others, and these all are data points which can be leveraged nowadays when we are talking about the geolocation controls, when we are talking about credential compromise. So what's your view on that, Brendan?
So the SAS part is an interesting question, because as a SaaS vendor out there, the only way I can get enterprise to come on board is to give them some form of assurance that your data is going to be private, your data is going to be well taken care of. All right, but the assurance comes in different form. All right, it comes from me telling you, Sunit, you'll be okay. All right, verbal, to certifications. All right, you see ISO 27001, you see ISMS certification, all right, and CCM, and so on and so forth. There are tons of certification out there. All right, but what is essentially the debate point here is that, do you choose to just trust your SAS provider, and what actions are you doing? All right, and there's the easy way of subscribing to SAS, where I go to my management, I say, we should use this, we trust them because they have certificates. All right, and I would have done my due care and due diligence, I wash my hands. All right, or I could go to them and say, look, among all the SaaS vendors, these are the more reputable and they have certification. On top of that, we still have to find ways to protect our own data, because at the end of the day, if that data were to be compromised, you will be on the losing end. There is no one that will suffer greater damage, all right, than the data owner themselves. All right, and that will always remain true. All right, it's just like I have money, I put it in the bank. I presume the bank is going to take care of my money. But if they lose it, I will be on the suffering end. And because you think of it as my money, all right, and if you equate money to all to data, therefore data is money, it's my data, and I will have to take care of it, right? And that shift that responsibility back, a lot of time into organizations themselves and into users themselves. Don't get me wrong, because I think a lot of SAS vendors are doing a fantastic job, all right? As they beef up security, and the awareness and the maturity is absolutely there. Now, the other part that is ultra critical is the fact that you don't end up with one SaaS provider. Some companies end up with 13 SaaS providers, one for HR, one for finance, one for communication suite, and one for everything. All right, and then the question here is, where is the consistency across 13? All right, and then where do you see data point that you can correlate that indicate that one of these users is potentially compromised? All right, and that is probably the more difficult part. And that is the part that, Brajesh, I think you can come in a later stage, to share a little bit more of that point, right? When the slide, talks about the zero trust and the practical approach, of zero trust, and the idea that you should not just trust, a user along the line. You should always have to revalidate them. And in the case of AISS, you revalidate them every time they access to different data points in different providers. All right. But then again, is if the logs and the assessment or the analysis itself is done in silo, how do you get an aggregated 360 view of the user's risk? All right. And that is where we basically come in from. And we talk about data security risks, having evolved, Brajesh. All right. We talk about, a good point will be privacy. All right. And in different countries, there is different privacy laws that are being pushed out. All right. Coming from Singapore, I could share my views that we have, PDPA, right, a national privacy law. I was being briefed by Brajesh that, India is potentially looking into a national privacy law as well. All right. And then, of course, you have CCA, you have GDPR. So we look at that, and that will continue to be a driver, right, for a lot of business, for a lot of organizations to take, privacy and data security seriously. Now, having said that, many of these are legislation. A lot of these are processes, right? A lot of these are compliance policies, right? And then eventually, there will be a real need of technological control to really prevent all these things from going on, all right? And that is where we want to come in. And we just want to share during our workshop, what are some of the advancements that the industry has made, right, in regards, to privacy, in regards to data protection. Now, I'm not going to run through, all these new threat vectors, and the zero trust. We're going to cover it, in greater details in following slides. But it's worth to highlight, at times of pandemic, all right, and all of us are somewhat affected by it. There is a news on 10th of December that says, the hacker actually stole Pfizer, all right, vaccine data in Europe, and that's a huge thing. And that's a huge thing, right? If you think about it, the impact of that, it's ridiculous. And then it made me wonder, all right, how could that have been possible, all right? And then if you look into that company that got it stolen, wouldn't you think that many of them are working from home?
Yeah.
Right. I mean, I'm not going to speculate, all right, because there is no report, a formal report. There are different reports available out there, but until you get a formal report, we should not speculate. But what we know for sure is that vaccine data, has been extracted, and rightly, these type of companies will have somewhat people working from home, all right. And if you try to relate them working from home, you start thinking, do they use SaaS? Do they have any cloud application? And then you think about the first topic that we discussed, all this SaaS, collaboration, email, all right, and working from home. Wouldn't that be the perfect evolution and the perfect storm for what has happened over here? All right, and I think it's interesting because Brijesh was sharing with me there is something similar that is happening in India, and I'll pass it back to you, Brijesh, to share more on that.
Yeah, so I was, Brendan, on the same ground. I was discussing with the multiple CISOs over the past, okay, and this news definitely hit, purely focuses on that. On one hand, the IT definitely brought a business enabler seat, right, and help in business continuity to the business, right? And as Sunit mentioned, that now cybersecurity and other things becomes a boardroom topic, okay? And on the other hand, we are seeing this data security risks which are evolved, okay? So this specific news talk about that the systems where COVID patients' data is stored on the government sites, okay? It's got hacked, okay? And those data got leaked. Now the impact of data can be huge, okay? Because we all know that how that data is capturing a business market, right? How that data going out from one vendor to another vendor creates a business impact, okay? And here we are talking about a human impact of it. That's why this particular news is hit my mind, that the impact of the cybersecurity is not only now limited to some millions, billions dollars of penalties going back to the company. It will have a bigger impact on the human. And that's definitely I put across back to this data security evolution. The one thing, Brendan, which really I think discussed in length with most of the CISOs and CIOs is about how this data risks needs to be understood, needs to be managed, or is any data security policies needs to be readjusted to suits in this zero trust environment. If you bring some view to that.
And I'll probably just hold on to my thoughts to the next couple of slides, and then I will come back to that topic, Brijesh, because it's a very good question that you raise. All right, and I think we do have one topic that's going to address it. When you see that slide, just remind me, and just bring up that question again. Now, and that's exactly what you were saying. Enterprise has to rethink the data protection strategy. All right, and like what Sunit is mentioning, it's a boardroom question. It's no longer a IT problem. All right, imagine how much that vaccine would have worth for Pfizer. All right, and people talk about AstraZeneca. People talk about their share price, going up and down because of reports of whether the vaccine is useful or not so useful. The test result itself is going to impact it. All right, and there's billions of money. All right, if you talk about all these orders that is coming in. All right, and imagine if this can be created by generic drug maker, and they lose that patent. All right, that itself is the survival of some of these pharmaceutical R&D companies. All right, and that's huge. And then with that, enterprise start to think, if 90% of all data has been created in the last 2 years, all right, the amount of data that has grown is huge. All right, that means 3 years ago, all the way back to the first time your company is being incepted, you have only created 10% of that data. All right, and then at that rate, you start thinking, how much data am I going to create in the next 1 to 2 years? And with the rate of data creation, how well can you protect it? Because if you create and you accumulate more data, you will tend to lose it easier. If I only have one file in my laptop and I only need to protect that one file, it's going to be a very easy job. If I have 10 gigs of data in my small little office and I know precisely where they are, what they are, and I'm tasked to protect this 10 gig, it's going to be easy. But if I don't know how fast my data has grown, all right, and that you are telling me that 10 gig data that I've done 2 years ago is only 10%, because by next year it's going to be 90 gig, right? And you can't keep track of data creation, right? Let's face it, we monitor a lot of things, but how many of us can actually keep track how many of new data being created on a daily basis? If you can't, do this, because in the past years, and we have been preaching and we have been selling DLP solution in India, in the world, and we are a recognized leader for data loss prevention for many years. And we kind of start realize that a DLP is effective if you classify them correctly. If you know what you want to protect, you will be able to protect it. But what happened to data that you don't know is critical, or data that is critical, you knew, but it's recently created. Someone literally just created the critical data piece this early morning. Before you had the chance to classify them, to fingerprint them, to create a policies to target them, it could have been leaked faster, all right? And with 5G going in, just imagine that impact, right? And then there must be a change of strategy. How do you protect unclassified data, all right? And that's probably the very interesting topic as well. Now, the best part here is a lot of this data is actually unstructured. And it's a key thing to discuss, because if it is a structured data, the idea of being to predict and anticipate a piece of critical data is easier. And I give you an example. I'm sure there is national ID in India. I'm sure there is driving license in India. I'm sure there's passport, banking account number. And all these are structured data that you could predict. There will be some form of patterns in there. All right. And in this case, when I create a policy, I would just create a policy and say, if I look into things that resemble this pattern, it's going to be critical. It's going to be something that I need to protect. All right. Now, the more difficult part here is unstructured data. All right. A piece of meeting of minutes, a piece of strategy discussion that I put it onto Word document. Right. There's no known pattern. Right. You cannot anticipate the creation of this data. You cannot anticipate the criticality and the confidentiality of this data, right? And because of that, some of the technology in the past may not be effective enough to basically handle it. So you're walking into uncharted territory, and you are challenging yourself, how do I protect data that I myself have not known if it is confidential, all right? And that moves it back into the zero trust discussion nicely, right? Yes, Sunil.
Brandon, I have a question. So, while looking at the previous slide where you shared this example of Pfizer data being stolen, it's a very fundamental question that, these are the global companies, and I'm sure they would have been spending so much on their data protection strategy. And now we are talking about, the strategy, and you will take us forward with that. But one question that comes to my mind, and probably everybody in the audience, is what is that then one fundamental thing that we all are missing, that if the global organizations are not able to protect their data, I am sure we are overlooking something. And with your experience, with your talking points with the clients, what is that one fundamental thing that we need to sort of take care, along with all the fancy things that we are doing in the strategy and the technology area?
So
does it boil down?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, Sunit. And I wish there is an easy answer that I could give you. It's like there's this one thing, do it. There will be no more data breach from today onwards. Obviously, we start from India because we are broadcasting this in India, right? But unfortunately, it will be more trickier than that. But there is some common traits that we are seeing. All right. Now, the first part here is a question that Brijesh was asking, and then you were asking this question as well. You talk about SaaS, all right, and then you talk about what is that one thing that's missing. And I kind of talk to a lot of practitioners, and this is not my word; it's them coming to me, and they say there is a over-reliance, all right, and a false sense of security in a lot of technology that you have today, all right. You would think that you have state-of-the-art firewall. You would think you have state-of-the-art SIEM. You would think you have state-of-the-art DLP solution. All right, and I don't want to take our own product out of the equation just to be fair to the rest of the industry. All right, but if you look into that, there's by having all these investments in place does not necessarily prevent you from having a data breach. All right, and then you look into various reports of how these data is being breached. The latest one, you even have a very renowned cybersecurity vendor that got breached, all right, without naming name out of respect, all right. And then you have another big vendor that does SIEM that got breached as well, all right. And you look into that, it's like, what is that one thing that you could have done that could have stopped all this, all right? And when we analyze all these, you kind of know there is more reason to basically start embracing zero trust, all right? And we are a big believer on a personal capacity, on my official professional role, right? And I'm a big believer of zero trust, right? And then if you look into all the industries, like Microsoft is talking about zero trust, Google is talking about zero trust. It's like everyone out there is talking about zero trust. NIST is talking about zero trust, all right? There must be something that is right over there. Right, and that is the exact point we want to bring up in the workshop, and we want to dissect about our understanding of zero trust. And if we have done zero trust correctly, and some of these breaches, all right, could these have prevented or minimized some of the attack surface? All right, and that is worth inspecting. All right, and we will come to that conclusion at the end of the session. All right, and then we can continue to debate and say, maybe it would have prevented it, or maybe not, all right? Or maybe it would have mitigated some of that risk, but maybe not completely, all right? And it's interesting because if you look at any attack, like in the past, all right, and like some of these big breaches, if they have been in the network, they have been exfiltrating data, all right? And they are talking about exfiltrating data for weeks, for months, for years. These are definitely things zero trust could have done something. All right, you're not talking about coming in once, grab all your data and exit immediately. Because if you were to do that, then that session itself is just a single session, single attack, and it's a maximum damage kind of thing. All right, that means these are users who are in the network and they can just move laterally, right, making use of different credentials, different devices, all right, and you assume they're all insider and you assume there is some form of trust in them, that you allow them to access data, you allow them to download data, and as a result, there is a breach, all right? And with that, that brings us to the discussion of zero trust because, like I said, zero trust is a very widely discussed topic. But what we are trying to do today is going to be interesting because we want to look into zero trust from the perspective of data and data protection. All right, so with that, Rajesh, you can bring us to the next slide. Now, I spoke about this earlier, all right, on the concept of zero trust and what's our understanding of zero trust architecture. And I was mentioning that it depends on who you speak to, right? What vendors you talk to and who is the practitioner, all right? To some people, zero trust is as simple as two-factor authentication. I have 2FA, I have zero trust. To a firewall company, zero trust is micro-segmentation. All right, I can microsegment it. I have some form of zero trust. All right. To some organizations, zero trust is about having MDM, BYOD, continuous validation of your devices. All right, and that is basically zero trust to them. Now, but what we see is in common is the zero trust idea itself revolves around many things. All right, but those are not the core of it. The core of it here is you want to assume zero trust even for your users that are internal. But why? The reason is because you are afraid that some of these users will have access to internal data and they are able to exfiltrate it. All right, and we are not questioning the approach of that, because it has to be done on a multi-layer. Zero trust has to be done on networks. It has to be done on devices. It's the right thing to do MFA. It's the right thing to do microsegmentation. It's the right thing to do SASE. All right, it's the right thing to do DLP. But the key thing over here is they talk about a couple of key elements in zero trust. All right, and with that, we want to bring you over to the next slide, Brijesh. And the next slide, it's going to be, sorry, isn't it?
No, I just had this question. So while you were explaining on a very high level about zero trust, and it means so many things to different people, please help me understand this one question that I keep coming across in different webinars, and somehow I feel that it's unanswered, is that when we talk about zero trust, does it essentially mean that the age-old tussle between the security folks and, let's say, the business front-end people, that security is somehow viewed as prohibiting the user experience in our business world? So does it mean that zero trust is not going to solve that problem, and it will further extend that problem? What is your take on that particular notion?
I think it's a fantastic question, Sumit. I think what you're referring to is the decade-long type of tussle between the business users and the security team. It's like, I want greater security. I will have more restrictions on my site. All right, and I want more flexibility, more ease of business, and then it will be less secure. All right, and of course, it's the user experience that we are talking about now. And again, it depends on where we are taking this zero trust discussion on. If you talk about a MFA, a 2FA type of zero trust, there will be some form of change of user experience. All right, I'm not going to use the word negative experience or bad or good, because those are subjective, right? But it will change the way they authenticate. It will change the way they get re-authenticated. It will get change when every time you log into Office, it will require you to bring up your handphone, either to key in the code, either to click and say yes, this is me, all right, because it's 2FA. And there will be a change of user experience if you talk about certain technology. Now, in the case of most technology, the idea here is Forcepoint, like any other vendors, we aim to basically take the friction out of it. All right, and we believe a good technology is a technology that will fit into business environment, not something that is superior technically. All right, superior technically is something that is granted. I expect you to be superior technically. All right, but between two superior products, I will, as a user, as a business, I will have to choose something that's going to fit into my organization. So whoever is able to fit in without creating too much friction, it's going to be the vendor of my choice. And the sooner vendors realize this, the sooner they will start designing products, they will start coming up with roadmap that basically take negative user experience out of it. All right, and Brijesh is going to share an example of how data protection in a zero trust approach has literally zero impact on the users. All right, because what we are seeing here is a continuous reassessment of your behavior. And the assessment of behavior, you're not touching the users yet. You're just looking into things that they are doing. You're collecting some metadata, you're collecting some events, and you're making decisions at the back. All right. Obviously, by the time you feel friction, it's a time when you are either blocked or isolated or quarantined. Right? And then you will complain. You say, yes, I'm not happy because you're impacting my users and they can't do the job. Now, and that will come back with another decade-long question. Is that a false positive, or is that a real threat that you have mitigated? All right, and that will be the litmus test. Because if you say it is a real risk that you have mitigated, you are the hero of the day, right? So it is like, wow, great. You are a great security practitioner. You have just, avoided the next blockbuster vaccine from leaking out to the world, all right? And that could have been you. Or it could have been a false positive. And you block your CEO from sending an email to his buddy, and he's very upset, and he's getting personal about it, all right? And it's just one fine line, all right? And obviously, in that case, that friction will depend on the results. If I'm giving you friction on the context of protecting you, and I have clear justification why you are protected, I think it's understandable, all right? Business would agree with you, everyone would agree with you. But if you keep on having false positives and business are impacted, all right, and on the context of, I need to tune this a little bit better, all right, I need to study this, we are still in the stage of learning, all right, the risk behavior and risk model of the users, that itself, they may have some tolerance until the model mature, but that tolerance, won't get, a very long runway, all right, and that's our experience by talking to customers, and that has changed the way the customers are consuming security analytics as well. Because in the past, we used to have product that does UEBA, all right, again, it's a big thing, user entity behavior analytics. And we used to sell that as a solution. And then we tell customers, you have to be patient with us. We're going to put in professional services. We're going to put in our experts. We're going to bring in data scientists. We're going to tune all this for you. And then they ask me, Brandon, look straight in my eyes and tell me, how long do you need to learn this? I'll be like, all right, let me see, 3 months, maybe 6. It depends. That's many factors. You don't want to put a real answer to that. But what we have learned from your points, and it's we need to get smarter on how to make this available, and we need to get smarter on how we want to make this more applicable, all right, and more consumable by users. So with that, we are moving away from fine-tuning it. We are moving away from learning from your environment. We are moving into a model where we pre-built indicator of risk, where we pre-built indicator of behavior, and we create it as a built-in, analytic risk models that we put it in the cloud, and we just allow consumers to use it, and that's going to be a lot easier. So time to value and time to learn, it's going to be reduced, and the friction period is going to be reduced greatly. And instead of putting it in and let you suffer a little bit as I try to tune it for you, right? We take that tuning and that suffering out, all right? And it's pre-done, just consume it. And with that, going back to the 7 tenets of zero trust architecture, I'm not going to read all this, but this is in reference to NIST 800-207. It's a wonderful document that Brajesh has found and he has shared with me, right? We all know pockets of information of zero trust. Obviously, it's coined by Forrester analysts in the first place. But I find this document as the ultimate document that I can read, I can understand, and it gives a lot of example and use cases. And this is probably one of the documents I strongly urge all of us to basically refer to. And in that document, it speaks about the 7 tenets of a zero trust architecture. All right, and I won't want to read all. I just want to pick a couple of them. The one part here speaks about all communication is secured regardless of network location. Right, and that's going to be important because that location doesn't matter anymore. So gone are the days where you have the castle and moat kind of approach where you have a perimeter. Nowadays, there's no longer perimeter over here, right? So you will have to find ways to assess all these users coming on from different locations. The individual enterprise resource is granted on a per session basis, right? So if I trust you on this session, I cannot automatically trust you on the next session, all right? And that's a very key thing on zero trust as well. And that talk about continuous assessment, all right? Because I will have to look at what you are doing on existing sessions, all right? To basically determine if I want to continue to allow you access on your next request to computing resources, all right? And that is basically the gist of it, that's the very key part of it, all right? If you are doing some authentication, or you're doing some policies, and the policies are static. The way I trust you the first time is the same way I trust you the second time. It's the same way I trust you the third time. You're just doing repetitive work using the same method. Where is the security? All right. So there must be improvement on the first to the subsequent, validation. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to challenge you the first time, but I'm going to observe what are you doing on this session to determine that if I trust you enough to allow you continuous access to the second session and subsequent access. All right. And I think that will be the key, all right, of zero trust architecture. And with that, the tenet itself clearly stated the access to resources has to be determined by a dynamic policies. And by the word dynamic, it basically means it changes. It changes means, I may allow you read only, I may not even allow you, all right? And the policy could change, all right? And it should change by observing the state of the client identity, their application, the assets they are requesting, and it may include behavioral attributes. How are you behaving as you consume IT resources? How are you behaving as you consume data? And it's very interesting because if you look into behavioral analytics, right, that is probably the most honest way of telling someone's intention. All right, and this kind of indicator of behavior, indicator of risk, a lot of time, cannot be fake. It's difficult to fraud it. All right, as you try to do something, that attempt, right, will always be shown. All right, and that is the part that Brijesh, will want to bring us through. He wants to speak about how do we analyze behavior. All right, and how do we analyze behavior and use it in a practical manner in a zero trust environment in a computing, use cases, right? As people access data, as people, ask for access, how do I use a continuous behavioral analysis of that user to determine that he should continue to be trusted or I should stop trusting him, right? In accordance to zero trust, because there should not be trust that is inherited. Every request has to be revalidated, right? And that's the key thing. And with that, Brijesh, I'm going to just move, and probably that will be the polling question number 2, right?
Thank you.
So, can you help us?
Yeah, sure. So Akshat, I'm making you presenter again. Please take up poll question 2. Everyone, please log into kahoot.it and we'll reshare the PIN numbers with you.
Thank you, Suneet. The PIN number is the same, 5719539. I have also shared that in the public chat for quick reference. Can we have a quick response from the audience in the public chat when you're ready? You have to log on to kahoot.it and enter the game PIN 5719539. Suneet, can you please let me know if the audience is ready? I cannot see the public chat as of now.
Yeah, just give me a second. I request everyone to log in to kahoot.it. And once you do that, please choose a different nickname because I'm facing the same issue. Please use a different nickname and you'll be fine. All right. So can we begin our poll?
Sure, Suneet. So here's your second question.
So the second question is, what are the major technologies that as a CISO can help in addressing the modern risk? And there are 4 options.
Please choose the corresponding figure in your mobile devices. And here is the result.
Okay, so we have zero trust as well as behavior analytics. So, Brandon,
Yeah.
Rajesh, what are your opinion about these two? I feel these are two related. And yes, we did not have full audience to answer it because of the limitation of time, maybe. But yeah, those are the choices that people have chosen: zero trust and the behavior analytics.
So one of the major technologies that as a CISO you see can help in the tracing, and they're spot on. But I'm just a little bit concerned because of the topic we are talking, and for the past half an hour we were talking about zero trust and behavior analytics. Would that have somewhat influence that answer? it's just a thought of it. But anyhow, let's just put it in a very layman way. When someone attacks you, they're not going to do it manually. They're going to run automated scripts at you. And if you are trying to defend them manually, you will be outpaced and you'll be outsmart almost every single time. All right. So in that sense, using a zero trust kind of automated way to basically defend against it's probably the best bet. I would say. All right. And then if you put in insider threat into the equation, this is even more difficult to prevent because this is the guy that you to go to become a crook, and he decides to start exfiltrating some of this information out for his personal benefit or simple fact of trying to get back at you. There's very little defense that existing technology has. And these are some of the questions that will be thrown at us. All right, it's good that you have DLP policies and you classify confidential data and you prevent leakages, right? But think about it, this is the user that is authorized to use this data in the first place. And his business function requires him to use it. It requires him to extract this information and to share it across, right? So in that sense, some of this legacy technology may not be effective, and a zero trust approach of reassessing, their risk behavior and their state, right? It's going to be ultra important, right? And with that, I'm going to share back to Rajesh because it's going to take us through some of the topic a lot because it speaks about left of data loss, all right? I'm not going to steal that spotlight from Rajesh. I'm going to let Rajesh share with you that interesting topic itself. What do you mean by left of data loss?
Okay, so one thing is definitely the polling reveals that the focus is definitely towards a zero trust technology, whether we are focusing on a layer-based approach, as Brendan mentioned, right? So definitely when we started focusing, we want that the activity will be monitored end to end, okay? And you can understand with the practical use case when you enter to a hotel building, right? You are monitored end to end within that building, starting from the security guard to the CCTV camera to the end, okay? So when we talk about a left of data loss, the intent is that, as Sunit, you mentioned that after spending trillions of dollars by the global companies, they are still getting data breach. Okay, so how we put a concept and move the left of the data loss, how we can bring a predictivity and proactivity to a data breach, okay, during the time when that malware or an exploit or that an hacker is there in the network, okay, by any means. So how we can reduce that dwell time, how we can understand that, how we can reduce a mean time to detect and a mean time to respond to that data breach is I'm going to cover in the next few slides. So the cybersecurity, if we see, has transformed from the last 5-10 years, okay. Pre-2015, if I'll talk about, we were purely talking about preventing and detecting technologies. Okay, technologies which talk about endpoint security systems, firewall systems, and then we were focusing on post-2015 detecting and responding to it. But in 2020, the cybersecurity challenges, the modern risk that we have understood, will only be able to quarantine those factors with more predictive and an auto response mechanism. Now, if we understand both these eras, the eras which we talking about pre-2020 was purely a reactive era. And the era where we were landing today, where we were focusing on whether zero trust, adaptive trust, explicit trust, the focus needs to be more on adaptive. Okay, as one of the principle that Brendan mentioned, okay, in a NIST framework is that it needs to be continuous and it needs to be dynamically adjusted. Now, if we understand the typical segregation that has happened in reactive and adaptive era is, in a reactive era, we were purely focusing on policy and rule-based logic. Okay, we were purely focusing on what to allow, what to block, define a policy framework to it, and doing it, whether it's a firewall as a rule, whether it's a DLP as a rule, or any other set of technology. Now, when we are landing to an adaptive era, those policy and rule will maybe only applicable to things which will be very known, but it needs to be powered by some data science methods. Now, those data science methods includes machine learning, whether we are using supervised, unsupervised, artificial intelligence. So those data science concepts which talk about not only indicators of compromise, the IOCs, the words that we are hearing, IOBs, which is indicators of behaviors. Okay, I will talk about how these indicators of behaviors can be built and how we have built it by introducing and understanding both cyber and non-cyber signals and building a context along with it. In a reactive era, the focus was purely on a particular event. We were focusing on that atomic event, and then maybe we are exporting that event to a SIM solution or any kind of a correlation system and understanding an impact only after the fact. Okay, it was not at all a predictive view. But when we landed to an adaptive era, the technologies that will help us is detecting the anomalies, understanding the outliers within the baselines, understanding the interaction analysis between a user and the data system. So the focus, as I mentioned, is not only on IOCs. Yes, IOCs are important. The known signatures, the known file hashes, the known bad domains are important. Okay, because they are protecting you for the things which are known. But will that be only able to work and provide your security in this era? May not. And that's where behavioral attributes needs to be ingested back to the security solutions. And the way when we are analyzing all that in a reactive era, the factor is that it's always be a manual intervention, manual investigation, which is required to act upon it. Okay, and being a human, we are always slow in responding to that event. We need to understand the event, analyze it, and with the overall cybersecurity system, if you see, okay, the shortage of the skill set that we see over the period, and the teams that are getting engaged within these analysis, okay, there is definitely a requirement of an auto response model. So if the security systems are aligned to these building blocks of an adaptive era, this will definitely help in reducing an overall impact of those breaches which has happened in the past. Now, when we're talking about a shift of left of loss, I want to just focus that the piece that we have built and that we have focused on by understanding whatever we have learned and understood from Brendan is that a continuous evaluation of a user interaction with the data needs to be covered, and that's to a proactive surface. Okay, and how it can be done is it brings an effective unit of measurement. Now that effective unit of measurement will be a risk score which derived from the certain different level of activities, okay, which are built into an indicators of behaviors, and that will help you to take a call and do an auto response and bring a dynamic nature to your policy framework. Okay, so it is bringing a meaningful visibility back to your detection systems and also helping you in orchestrating that to bring a control point to it. Now, it may be ingested at your network layer with the zero trust network access kind of solution. It may be ingested to your data protection layer while the user sending that data across the channel. It may be ingested along with your cloud application solution where any cloud-based downloads and discoveries can be automated controls. Okay, it can be ingested at any layer. And that's where it will help in reducing an overall risk from a zero trust point of view. Now, I will hereby introducing a concept, okay, a platform which Forcepoint triggered with the dynamic user protection. The focus is how to build those concepts which we have understood in the last slides into a solution, into a platform that can be delivered purely from the cloud. So first of all, the solution is powered by a strong, a very lightweight agent which get installed into a machine. Okay. This can help you in understanding your user activities, whether he's in your network, whether he's out of the network, and in a roaming workforce scenario, it makes more sense to have it working from anywhere. Now, this agent will also help you in ingesting those set of activities back to the user protection platform and bringing the other edge platforms, whether you are redirecting your request via cloud security gateway, whether you are using a data protection platform and you are ingesting those data protection activities via that agent back to the user protection platform. It will help in significant footprints and performance improvements because we are ingesting it on the agent layer. There is a cloud management console, which is SaaS delivered, tenant management, investigation, everything. And definitely we are focusing on ingesting more layers within APIs, okay, where you can ingest not only your cyber behaviors, but non-cyber behaviors like physical batch access systems activity of a user can also be logged back and reported back to a cloud management console. So we have a clear path to bring those integrations into this dynamic user protection platforms. Now, indicators of behaviors. Now, when we talk about a behavioral analytics, which is also widely used term, we understood various building blocks of behavioral analytics. Okay, some people call it as a scenarios, models, features which build those behavioral analytics. And as Brendan mentioned, last few years we were talking about UEB, user entity behavioral analytics, which is also one of the solutions which talks about the behavioral analytics. But the only challenge with that behavioral analytics solutions is that it's very PS intensive. Okay, it requires a strong, skilled person to understand a user environment, build a model and a feature which suits that environment, and then do it on a gradual basis. So it's very PS intensive. So based on the experience that we carry from the last 15, 20 years into this insider threat as a concept, okay, we build as ready factors, indicators of behaviors, okay, which are an innovative approach that we build on a behavioral analytics. Okay, we assess user behavior, we understand where this user interacts with the data points, whether that data points are there on premise, on cloud, it doesn't matter. Okay. We build a risk score of that individual activities and then auto adjust the policies based on the dynamic data protection. So the data protection get powered by a user attributes with building more context and more signaling back to your data protection system. Now, you may ask a question that why do you think that these indicators of behaviors tamping by a Forcepoint, okay, will bring that effectiveness to the behavioral analytics? So I want to give you a view that we are not focusing on this dynamic user protection from this only product. We carry more than 18 plus years of experience into insider threat risk portfolio. Previously being a part of the Raytheon, okay, we have a flagship product which talks about user activity monitoring, which we used to call as a Forcepoint insider threat, which purely focused on a deep visibility and broad capability of what is happening within the user machine. Okay, starting from a registry changes to the network changes, file manipulations, browser, private browser impact, cloud file sync. There are so many collectors which we were using in our insider threat, Forcepoint insider threat capability. Okay. We were ingesting these capabilities to a command and control center. And along with that, we were also focusing on behavioral analytics, which is UEB. Okay, which is also bringing a different meaningful analysis with the supervised machine learning and unsupervised machine learning, which is also delivered an on-premise and AISS solution. We built a collaboration and integration and understood what are the unique propositions between an FIT and an behavioral analytics and how it can build a more unique propositions with the data protection platform. Okay, so this is already globally adopted insider threat solutions, which we are selling across the US federal, across the Indian market into BFSI sectors, into the manufacturing sectors, into a power sectors. Okay. So bringing a user protection purely cloud delivered is to focus it more from a zero trust perspective. How we can bring those deep visibility, orchestration purely delivered over the SaaS. Now, I want to bring you more in detail from an indicators of behaviors that how it works on ground. Now, when we talk about indicators of behaviors, those are pre-built by our researchers, by our X Labs teams. Okay, these behaviors, whether we are talking about a scenario where evasion is happening, where data stockpiling is happening, data exfiltration is happening, or a lever, a user which needs to be monitored, all in all. So if we see set of activities that a user applying for a LinkedIn job, an evasion is happening where during a Zoom call you are taking a screenshot, where from a large several files you are compressing that files, which can be a stockpiling case. All these behaviors will build a risk scores. Okay, and this risk scores are real-time calculated on that agent, and that agent will dynamically adjust your policy that if your risk score is high and you're still doing that set of activity, which now you're not able to do so with an auto response, you will be blocked at that time. So we are only bringing that protection mechanism when we have already showed that the set of behaviors over the past is suspicious or malicious. And we bring a different type of risks associated with each and every activity, and this risk expires over the time. This risk degrades over the time. Okay, and we will bring the weight mechanisms across all the risk that is happening over the past. Okay, so I will definitely run through on the real use case on that and bringing you a real view to it. So dynamic user protection overview. Now, dynamic user protection, if you understand as a value driver, okay, why the solution, why the concept is more relevant, is because it focuses on typical time a breach, to understand a breach is required, which is a mean time to detect, which goes into multiple months. If we have seen the last breaches, whether it's a Marriott breach, whether it's other breaches that we have seen, the user protection focuses on minimizing this mean time to detect to a zero value, okay, by analyzing that user and data interaction analysis. Not only that, with the human intervention, right, we have seen in the past that the mean time to respond to that breaches or mean time to recover from that, okay, is also not a real time. So the dynamic user protection brings you to reduce that mean time to respond when you are seeing that set of signal and activities which you are seeing, which are alarming, which are suspicious, then that we are also reducing it to zero. And if we reduce this mean time to detect and mean time to response, the focus is that we will provide a significant impact to reduce the overall risk postures. Okay, so whether the user is anywhere, the overall risk postures with that factors, with that analysis, we have seen that it can reduce up to 90% annually by bringing these concepts to it. Now, when you ingest this user protection mechanism to the data loss prevention, the data loss prevention will not be then only limited to the channels that you have seen in the past. Whether you are discovering the data which is anywhere, right? Whether you're on-premise or on the cloud, whether you are classifying a data with some of a classifications tool and integrating with the data mechanism from a governance perspective, or whether you are using highly sophisticated controls like OCR, like machine learning or a drip DLP. The human-centric analysis will bring a dynamic controls into a data protection. Okay, so that will bring an add-on which makes sure that your data protection while you are accessing a data, while you're sending a data, is controlled based on the user risk analysis rather than purely on the static policies. Yes, static policies are good, but dynamic nature will definitely bring the real-time user controls. Now, if we understand from a user activity monitoring perspective, okay, as I mentioned, it's purely cloud delivered. We focusing purely on not only cyber but also non-cyber behaviors, and we understand over the past that a user activity monitoring integrating with the technologies, whether it's a data protection, whether it's a network protections, will bring you a real-time use cases that can reduce your overall risk exposures. And definitely it will bring different personas which are there within your environment, whether it's a compromised user, whether it's a malicious user, whether it's a leaver. There are different personas that you can also discover during this modern cyber risk time. Now I'll bring some architecture view to it. Now, as I mentioned, there will be a unified agent. Okay, so unified agent means if you are already leveraging a DLP agent of Forcepoint, okay, then the same agent will be used and enabled on the data user protection indicators of behaviors. Data user protection as a cloud-based tenants will be available to you, which will be ingested by the different incidents coming out from a DLP and the other set of components, whether it's your access patterns via an SSO, whether it's your usage and data activity via cloud web security, whether it's your sentiments over the period of time. All those set of SaaS applications, cloud security applications, are also getting ingested into this dynamic user protection. Okay, and the risk score, which is developed by the indicators of behaviors with the different patterns that are there as a part of IOBs, are shared across the system, the Forcepoint system, okay, to bring a real-time protection, okay, rather than relying and detecting and understanding those use cases, bringing a real-time view and protection to it with an auto response system. So with that, I think, Brendan, let's go to the real use cases, practical use cases. So if you can help us in understanding how this come up as a real use case in a customer which may be using a different SaaS and collaborations platforms.
Thank you, Brajesh. All right, and I think we're going to show the real technology. All right, let's hope you have access to the platform and you're able to show that. All right, but before we do that, we're going to just run through a use case. We talk about zero trust, we talk about dynamic policies. We want to tie it all in and see it in action. All right, so this is the part where we talk about making it real. Right now, I want you to look into this chart from left to right. All right, so what you're looking here is there is a scoring of 24, 45, 38, 45, and so on. All right, so this scoring is what Brajesh was explaining earlier. He calls it the indicator of behavior. All right, and we call it in short, we can call it a risk score. So imagine all the users in your organization has a risk score on top of his head, and depending on what you do, that number changes. All right, and that is the real, essence of the zero trust, because you have to assess the user continuously. Just because you are trustworthy at point of entry doesn't mean I will trust you continuously once you're in my organization. All right, so the real approach over here is to change that concept and say, I will trust you for this period of time to access this information. But the next period of time, as you request for next resources, I will have to reevaluate you. Now we take that one step further. We don't want to wait until the next time you ask for resource. We want to continuously assess you as you consume IT resources in the organization. All right, and the way to do it is very simple. So imagine if a user is stockpiling, information on the laptop. They are downloading huge amount of data from the cloud, from your file servers, from the databases, and they start putting it into zip folders and they zip it up in a single file. The act itself is known as stockpiling. And stockpiling is a known risk model that we have pre-built in the DUP solution that Brajesh highlighted earlier. By doing that action, which is harmless in most organizations, which will not trigger any security policies in most organizations, will add your risk scoring. And then immediately after that, you start putting attachment and send it to your personal account. Now that risk scoring has increased, all right, and you are now at risk score of 45, all right. And then what happens here is, in most cases of behavioral analytic or risk scoring calculation, you cannot think about a solution that keep on adding risk scoring but doesn't deduct risk score. Because if you have that strategy, it's a matter of time before all employees will be at 100. Because what is essentially happening here is you're just looking for time they do something wrong or they make some mistakes, and you keep on adding the risk scoring, and eventually everybody will be at 100. So what is critical over here, as important as it is to increase risk scoring, it is more important for the system to know how to reduce their risk scoring. So the best way to reduce risk scoring is to look into the time of compliance. How long can you stay compliant? If you can stay compliant and you can show responsibility, you can show maturity in the way you handle IT and computing resources, your risk should naturally go down. So in other words, the simple logic to that is simple. If you don't do anything that shows that you're irresponsible, your risk score should reduce by time. All right, and with that, in this perfect example, they say 30 days has passed without him doing anything significant, and his risk score will reduce all the way back, to a very low scoring. And then he starts copying things from a sensitive application. It goes up to 38. He performs a screen capture. It goes up to 45. He uploads that screen capture into USB thumb drive. The risk score goes to 70. All right, and then eventually he do a large attempt to move files out to the cloud, to a personal cloud, and that risk score hits to 95. So what I'm explaining on the slide is just one aspect of thing. What we have been talking about is about risk scoring continuous calculation, how risk score increased by event, how risk score decreased by non-events, right? And what is really important over here is to pay attention to the bottom part, of that slide. It speaks about 4 primary categories. Yes, Sunit.
Sorry to interrupt. So yeah, so the initial idea that I got was this is a static evaluation, but now I think you made clear with this use cases that it's really a dynamic. It's just that, correct me if I'm wrong, that the underlying factors will keep changing. So for example, if today stockpiling is maybe contributing more towards my risk score, tomorrow maybe screenshot will be contributing more. So which means that across all the 4 or 5 dimensions that you assess or provide the risk assessment or the risk score, the factors keep changing, but the score will remain at a particular level as an employee passes through his journey within a company. Is my understanding correct of this risk score?
That is mostly correct, Sumit. So if you were to do something today, your risk score will go up to, let's say, 20, all right? But it reduces over time. So the key thing here is it depends on when is the next time that you're going to do something again, all right? So if you're doing something like stockpiling and you did a screenshot, but then you didn't go to the extreme of doing something else continuously to indicate that you have turned, all right, then we're going to leave you alone, right? As far as risk scoring is concerned, you have arrived to 40, 50, but over time it's going to be diluted, right? It's going to start decreasing, all right? But if someone goes in and they were aggressively going after data, and I want you to think about a hack that you know. Everybody has a hack story that they know, all right? To me, the Sony hack, it's always there. All right, and then to some it could be the Pfizer hack, to some it could be the Merit hack and all. And imagine if the user goes in and they start running laterally, they start to prop, computer, they start to stockpile information, they try to attempt to access different network files, different file servers, and all these are indicators of behaviors. All right, and if they continue to do that, it will start to increase that score to the point that even if you have an authenticated username, I'm going to lock you out because you have proven to me that your behavior is extremely risky. All right, and there could be 2 scenarios. There could be a valid user who have shown that they are non-compliant and they are reckless in handling organization of computing resources, and which naturally should be mitigated. Or it could be a case where someone had control of your account because of malware and they were impersonating you using the resources that is trusted upon you to basically start exfiltrating data, right? And in those 2 cases, this will be extremely effective. And if we were to bring this one step further, if you go down to the chart, it basically shows a risk scoring of 4 different categories. It says if you are 0 to 40, it could be low risk, 40 to 50 could be medium, if you are 60 to 80 could be high risk, and 90 to 100 could be critical, for example. So you put them into 4 buckets. Then these users in the organization will have 4 categories. These are the low risk, these are the medium risk, these are the high risk, and these are the ultra high risk, critical risk. And then you decide you want to do a policies on them. And your policies are ultra powerful because it's 2 dimensions. In the past, people just do policy on, if you do this, I block you. All right. So what we're doing now is that if you do this and your category is critical risk, I'm going to block you. But if you do this, but your risk scoring is extremely low, I'm going to allow it. All right. And then if you start thinking about the question that you brought to me, Sumit, there is this debate about business and security. Are you slowing down business? So in the contrary, if implemented correctly, you are basically going out with a strategy that says if a user can show that they are responsible in handling data, they are compliant and they understand governance, they will enjoy more flexibility. They will have less friction as they navigate through different security devices. All right, and that is the ultimate good, is to free the good. All right, and then of course for those with that intention, it will be extremely effective to basically mitigate, the risk and damage that they do. All right, and with that, I'm going to pass on to Brijesh, and I think he will take us through to the actual, demo of what this means in a real, technology solution.
Okay, thanks, Brandon. Thanks for this use case, and let me bring a real use case demo. Okay, so here we are talking about a user, okay, who in this case is Kunal. Okay, so he's just trying and to connect and chat with a colleague, and the discussion is going on that if you applied for this job and this particular person has gone to a LinkedIn and done a set of activity to apply for this particular job. Now, this all set of an activity is getting captured by an agent sitting on his machine silently. So whatever the activities that he's doing is all getting captured. Now, at the same time, the other set of components that he's accessing during that time. So he's taking a screenshot of an opened critical document and try to copy this set of documents back to a Dropbox, okay, or to any other collaboration platform. Doing a compressing of it. So these all series of events, okay, turning a Wi-Fi off so that he should not be a part of a network, okay, and then trying to copy those things to a removable media. Now, when he's tried to copy to a removable media, definitely it got contained because you have a traditional static DLP policy running to prevent it. But the intent, the context, the signal has been captured. Now, he will try to circumvent that control and create and try to upload this compressed files back to the Dropbox, okay, which also got contained because now you have defined a data protection policies back to your collaboration first. Now, let's log into this dynamic user protection window and see this set of activities. So top user activities, we can see Kunal Agarwal, who is doing a sensitive data copy. We can see a complete timeline of Kunal Agarwal starting from the set of activities and what are the different indicators of behaviors he's violating. Now, this all is adding up to a risk score, which becomes 97 for Kunal. Okay. Now, with this piece, you will able to see that why Kunal is factored as a risky user. So out of your users, multiple users, now you will understood that these are my critical users, these are my critical entities that I have to focus on. So this particular tool will bring you a visibility both at the data layer as well as at the user protection layer. Okay, so on the left hand side, you will see all the investigations, you will see a complete timeline, you will see a classification engine, what is the action that was performed, what are the timestamp at that event was done. This all is getting captured, getting logged, and in the near real time, this is getting blocked for that particular user because his risk score has increased to 97. So whatever the category which Brendan San mentioned to you, low risk, high risk, medium risk, there is a corresponding action plan which can be applied to that user so that at the real time, based on the score, his policies, stronger, stringent policies can be applied. So we want to now focus and conclude this bringing a next generation data protection mechanisms, which is purely converging the user and data protection layer. So when we focus on a data protection alone, okay, those who have adopted a data protection alone is definitely help in detecting what is getting out from your organization across the channels. Okay, it's definitely helping with those indicators of compromise. You are manually inspecting those DLP incidents by your incident analyst. It definitely has improved your response, but with manual investigative processes. Okay, with a data loss once occurred, you will do have your critical response team who are reacting on that data loss incidents and taking an action on that individual or a group of individuals. It definitely reducing your risk posture, but only post the incident. But it is not stopping you on any financial impact or any data breach down the line which may impact it due to the modern cyber risk. Now, when you integrate this data protection component with the user protection component, then your detection, mean time to detection becomes zero because you are early understanding as a precursor why this type of an activity has been happening, which will lead to a data protection. And then the response mechanism has also increased, okay, where your mean time to response also reduced to 0. And this all added to your auto response model and bringing this user protection and data protection inclusive to bring a dynamic user and data protection platform. So that's the view which we want to bring it across to you. And Brendan, any view which you want to bring on this conclusive slide before we move out to a discussion?
I think it goes back to the general best practice of security. It's like this. There's no one silver bullet. It's always layered security and all. So in the past, 5 years ago, 8 years ago, when we talk about layer security, it is about having layers of antivirus, IPS, firewall, proxies, and so on and so forth. But those were the days, all right? And until today, I'm not saying those are outdated technology. Those are absolutely critical protection that any modern organization should have. But the layering of security approach have changed. Those layers that you have in place may no longer be adequate, to protect you against modern attack. And Sunit brought a very good discussion point, and he asked a great question in the beginning when he was referring to Pfizer attacks and the Indian hacks. I'm sure they have layers of securities. These are billion-dollar type of companies, and they are adequately, financial adequately vested, all right, to take on cyber security risk. And then the question is not so much on just financial resources. It's also about approach, all right, and that approach is absolutely critical. And then where we are coming from here is, and I looked through the topics that the whole event on the AISS 2020, all right, and it is interesting to look at other speakers because they were talking about prediction, they were talking about AI, they were talking about machine learning, and if there is one common theme in all the vendors around the world that is doing as of today, it's about predicting, all right? It's about prediction, it's about anticipation. You cannot react when things happen anymore. That's just too slow, all right? And with that in mind, we talk about data loss prevention and Forcepoint being a leader of data loss prevention. It's insufficient, and we don't want to stop there, all right? We want to bring it one level up. And then we start thinking, how can we make data loss prevention smarter? And there are a couple of use cases that DLP itself cannot cover. How do you protect files that are not classified? We don't have answer to that. How do you protect a user that has rights and has been exempted by the DLP policies to steal data? And you can't, because you have entrusted them with that data, and it's their job function to access customer record in the first place. All right. Now, in taking those few pointers in, the only way to bring DLP smarter is not to create another DLP engine. It's rather to come up with an analytics platform to basically run behavioral scoring of all these users and then pass this risk scoring into a DLP system for enforcement. All right, and it's a simple act. All right, it's basically having a DLP system and having an analytical engine and using that analytical engine to feed scoring into the DLP system to make it smarter. And that is basically the approach on the technology side of things. We could have started with that, but then the appreciation of zero trust and the understanding of the zero trust architecture would not be there, because essentially what we are trying to do here is in respect of that zero trust and understanding that framework and that architecture, finding the reasons, dissecting it in this workshop, different angles of analyzing why this is important, how this is being done correctly, and what does that mean in the technological solution approach, right? And I think Brijesh has covered that very, very well in this slide and the previous video example. All right, Brijesh, will you move next?
Yeah. So with that, I will maybe ask Sunit to open the board for the Q&A session. Sunit.
Thank you, Brandon, and thank you, Brijesh. This presentation and this workshop is really helpful. And to me, it's like the time of the year, right? Which is 2020, and we are closing, coming to an end. One of the questions that was asked earlier, and I still remember, because many CISOs, were struggling at that time when we were at the beginning of the lockdown, March, April is the time, because of the distributed work environment, because of the work from home environment. The question really was that if we are sharing, if we are doing everything online, and if we are doing collaborative tools, then how do I ensure that person sitting right, opposite in the camera is not taking screenshots, right? That was the question that came up then. And now in the concluding month of the year, I almost have come across the answer through your workshop, right? But I'm pretty sure that people who are in the audience, they would want to sort of do a little bit of deep dive into the screenshot aspects, because so many of us are struggling with that, right? In today's presentation, we don't have any client critical information that's been shared, but there might be, right? Because we are talking about the insiders. So can you a little bit do a deep dive into how does Forcepoint help to solve that issue? Or if at all they do?
Yep. We can, and I, for one, Sumit, it's one of those guys who take screenshots on Zoom. When you start asking, I kind of feel guilty. I say, maybe he knew what I was doing. So, and it happens to a lot of us, right? Because we join a very interesting webinar, for example, or we are listening to a financial report, and there is certain details there that it's just not fast enough for us to interpret and analyze the numbers, all right? And with that, we want to just take a screenshot so that we can revisit, and then read it, all right? Now there is a couple of dimensions to that, right? The first thing here is when I look into financial and management report in my own company, all right? It's a non-issue because I am part of the company. I am the audience. That report is meant for me, all right? In other words, and getting that screenshot is not a risk by itself. Now, what the problem is that I could have joined this Zoom meeting from any devices. I could be in a cyber cafe. I could be in my relative's house using his computer over dinner, and that happens to all of us. It's like, hey, do you have an iPad? I need to join this call, all right? Because my phone just ran out of battery, all right? And then when I take screenshots, what is essentially happening there is the risk is not with me seeing it. The risk is with that piece of data is now lying on an unknown device, or it could be a copy of that digital data is now lying out there. All right, and then the effort to secure that, it's going to be extremely difficult, right? It's going to be extremely difficult. From Forcepoint, on the solution point of view, there are a few ways of how we tackle it, all right? And we don't have answer for all scenario. I'll be very honest with you. All right, so we have, in our previous technology on our insider threat behavior, as our FIT, right, our insider threat software, as well as our DLP application. So we have endpoint software that could prevent users from taking screenshots. All right, so that is a very effective kind of way. If I see that you have something, certain application, we want to prevent it. And I can tell you, I can share a story on one of the enforcement agencies of a government in Asia, without naming countries and all right? And they are a user of this. And Brijesh rightfully mentioned, this is something that goes all the way back to Raytheon time, all right? It's a technology that we inherited from our parent company. It's an extremely powerful software. So what they were doing here is, this is enforcement arm, right? Just think about police. And it's very powerful because you could run background checks on people. So they were reported cases that they were using this software to run background check on their spouse, on their girlfriends, on their friends and all. And there was abuse, kind of thing. And then when they are there, they start taking screenshots and all. And as a result, what they can do here is, there are technology that allows you to say, if you turn on certain application that is extremely sensitive, all right, I take a video recording, all right? And when you start a video recording, you can basically see abuse of application. all right? Before the point of screen capture, the point that you were, digging around looking for, information that you shouldn't be accessing in the first place. So that whole session can be recorded. That's one thing. Now the second part, of course, knowing that you launch a certain application, we can prevent you from screenshotting. All right. So if I have, for example, a software like Zoom, if I see Zoom, no screenshot, easy. That is something we have today. All right. Absolutely done. All right. Now the critical part here is, if I don't use your managed device, what's going to happen? All right. That is when policies and controls have to come in place. And you will have to make a hard decision and say, you don't use a managed device, no Zoom for you. Which is going to be a tough call, all right? Because it's unlikely everybody will use it from the laptop. People like to use it from phones and from different devices, all right? So you want to make an enforcement and say, unless it's a trusted device, no Zoom call. And it won't go to that extreme, all right? And many a time, what we see here is even Zoom itself, there are different versions of Zoom. You have the normal Zoom that you use. We use Zoom Golf that is approved by the federal government of the US. And what we are learning from that here is it depends on the session that you are running and how sensitive that is. If it is extremely sensitive, then you will force your users to use a secure device, a secure channel to access to that session, right? To ensure that they can't, do screen capture. That's the only way, right? So it will be a combination of process, policies, and technology rather than just, a pure technology itself. Now, on the other side, if we go back to this topic on zero trust and adaptive trust, the act of screenshotting increases your risk scoring. So every time when you take screenshot, my risk score is going up. There's a chance that my risk score is already going up in my own company, right? When I take screenshots. And then they look into what happened after that. Gone are the days where we evaluate you on a single action. I can't do things like you take screenshot, you are a bad person, I'm going to disconnect you, I'm going to pull out internet from your house. That is not going to happen. All right. But if you do something silly, I'm going to observe you longer. If you do a series of actions that are extremely questionable, that show how reckless you are in handling, IT or computing resources, then a mitigation action should eventually be imposed on you. All right. And that would be the ultimate answer that is in alignment with, zero trust approach.
Sure. This was really helpful. In fact, I had this question and I wanted to ask you offline, but did it ever happen to you? But you have already answered. Did it ever happen to you that because of the screenshot, hey, Brandon, you're not allowed to come to the office tomorrow? But yeah, you have already answered it.
It didn't go that far, but there are cases where I got email, right?
Okay.
And my own security incident team, I don't know if Brijesh have received that, but I have received some email, and I've received emails on my direct reports. It's like they came to me and they said, hey, you know what, your teammate is doing this. Are you aware of it, Mr. Tan? Those kind of things happens to me. All right, and it's good because A, it's not causing them friction because they didn't lock them out. All right, but B, we picked it up. All right, but those were the days where we don't have adaptive trust. It was still on detecting and reporting. And then the mitigation is a human action because they were asking me, what do you want to do? Do you now want to do what Sunit suggested and pull the internet out of them? All right. And then I was like, yeah, I think it's valid. All right. I can check with them, but I think it's okay. And then now you are moving into a space where what if I was wrong? What if I am the weakest link? What if my justification, because it's a blind trust that I trusted my employee and I allow them to continue, that could have been a compromise. All right, and then you have to take emotion out of it because he brought me beer and I was having good drinks with him. He's my friend. I trust him. You have to take that out and then put it back into binary, put it back into computer, and you rely on the computer. You train them. You say when you see this and this and this, it's a no-no. You see this and this, but not this. It's okay. All right, the risk scoring has not hit 80. Don't lock him out. He's at 50, 60. Yes, there's some risk. All right, but let's not be extreme. All right, and I think that will probably be the answers of the future. All right, there will be a lot of automation in terms of analysis of human risk. There will be a lot of automation in terms of protecting users and data moving forward.
Sure. Brandon, Brijesh, I'm also mindful of time. but I would want to really continue this conversation beyond 1 o'clock also India time. But yeah, I'm mindful of that. And so any closing statements from both of you, Brandon, Brijesh, before we can end this workshop?
I think I speak a lot. I'm going to pass that honor to Brijesh. I think he knows the market a little bit better, so I'm going to let him do that glorious closing, Brijesh.
So I think over the last 2 hours, what we have understood, okay, is the intent from Forcepoint and DSI both is to make sure that that the consumers should not be, can say, confused with the terms like zero trust and other factors. Okay, there are the technologies which needs to be adopted, and I want to take a statement which Brendan mentioned, that whenever you are focusing on a cybersecurity framework, whether you are drafting a new policy specific to zero trust and all, focus on these 3 principles of cybersecurity, which is definitely require a people, process, and technology to cover it completely. Okay, it's not only a single solution or a single technology which will resolve all the problem, but definitely with the people, process, this can be done. Okay, and definitely the focus is to bring that, whether we are focusing on India as a market or globally. Okay, the factor is that if we are understanding the interaction points of where our users are interacting with data, okay, and what those data criticality back to you, okay, then that stitchiness will definitely brings a cybersecurity platform which covers the complete security end to end for the zero trust. So that's my concluded remarks for this particular session.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Brandon, Brijesh. I think I personally have learned a lot, and key messages, if I were to take with you, they were around 2-3 points. Number one is, do not have false sense of security, because no matter how much you invest, if you are in that trap, then probably, someday you will be the victim. So that's number one. I think the second is we are in the adaptive era, which means that there is no room for reactive security in the organization. So we must leverage the data as much as possible, have the dynamic policies as much as possible, and just be mindful of what's going around you, so that you can reshape, recalibrate the tools that you have in place, the defense systems that you have in place, the policies that you have in place. I think with those 2 or 3 points in mind, and of course the funds and the credibility that each organization has built over time, I think you would be in a better position to secure yourself. So those were key learnings that at least I have from Forcepoint workshop. So Brandon, Brijesh, thank you so much for your time, and thank you all the participants who could join us, attend the poll questions. I think this was really valuable insights for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Sumit. All right. Thank you so much. Thanks, Brijesh.
Thank you.
Thank you. And before we log off, there's just one message that our parallel track sessions will begin in 40 minutes from now, 1:40 India time. I wish to see all of you there. Thank you so much. And we'll also have our keynotes. Brandon will be there as well. And I'm looking forward to see everyone there. Thank you.